When Star Wars A New Hope was released in 1977, audiences didn't need a guidebook to understand the story. They didn't need a moral flowchart. They didn't need irony, subversion, or moral ambiguity to tell them how to feel. You knew who was good, you knew who was evil, and more importantly, you knew why it mattered. Luke Skywalker stood for hope, courage, and self-sacrifice. Darth Vader embodied fear, tyranny, and oppression. The Empire was evil, not misunderstood, not morally complex, not a matter of perspective, but evil. And the rebellion, they were flawed, scared, and outgunned, but unquestionably good. Star Wars didn't apologize for this clarity, it embraced it. But fast forward to today, and something fundamentally has changed. In modern Star Wars, it often feels like villains are sympathetic and justified, heroes are incompetent, bitter, or morally compromised, evil is reframed as misunderstood, and goodness is portrayed as naive, outdated, or even dangerous. The question is why? And more importantly, what was lost along the way? George Lucas didn't create Star Wars as a moral puzzle, he created it as a modern myth. He openly drew from Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, classic fairy tales, World War II cinema, samurai films, ancient myths of good versus evil. In myths, morality isn't muddy, it's instructional. The dark side wasn't a political viewpoint, it wasn't trauma-informed, it wasn't just another way of seeing things. The dark side was corruption. It fed on fear, anger, hatred, selfishness. And the light side required discipline, compassion, self-control, and sacrifice. This wasn't accidental. Lucas wanted Star Wars to teach young audiences that choices matter and that power without morality leads to destruction. That's why A New Hope works so well. Luke refuses power for power's sake. Obi-Wan sacrifices himself willingly. Han learns that cynicism isn't strength. And Vader is terrifying precisely because he represents what happens when someone gives in. The story never asks us to admire the Empire's efficiency. It never frames the Death Star as misunderstood. It never mocks heroism as childish. Good is good, evil is evil, and the struggle between them means something. Modern interpretations often attempt to humanize the Empire. We're told they brought order, they had families, they were just doing their jobs. The rebels were terrorists. But here's the truth. The Empire was a stand-in for fascism. Lucas wasn't subtle about this. Stormtroopers are literally named after Nazi shock troops. Imperial officers wear authoritarian uniforms. The Empire destroys planets to maintain control. This wasn't moral ambiguity, it was a warning. When modern Star Wars reframes the Empire as morally gray, it undercuts the original message. It suggests that oppression is just a matter of perspective, and that's not what Star Wars was ever about. Star Wars didn't say, everyone is a little evil. It said, unchecked power corrupts absolutely. That distinction matters. One of the most notable shifts in modern Star Wars is how it treats its heroes. In the original trilogy, heroes grew. They learned from failure, but they were never stripped of their moral center. In modern entries, however, legacy heroes are often bitter, broken, incompetent, or actively wrong. Luke Skywalker, the embodiment of hope, becomes a man who gives up, hides from responsibility, and briefly considers murdering his nephew. Whether you like or dislike the portrayal, the philosophy behind it is clear. Idealism must be deconstructed. Modern storytelling often treats optimism as naive and moral certainty as dangerous. Heroes must be taken down a peg. But Star Wars wasn't created to tear heroes down, it was created to lift audiences up. When heroes are portrayed as fools for believing in goodness, the message changes. It becomes hope is childish, belief is a mistake, conviction leads to disaster. This is not myth, this is cynicism. At the same time heroes are weakened, villains are elevated. Modern Star Wars often asks us to empathize with tyrants, excuse mass murderous trauma, view destruction as understandable. Now, empathy itself isn't wrong, but when empathy becomes justification, the story loses its moral anchor. Darth Vader was tragic, but his tragedy didn't excuse him. Redemption came after accountability. Today's villains are often framed as victims first and villains second, or sometimes not villains at all. This blurs the message. If everyone is justified, no one is responsible. Star Wars once warned against the dark side. Now it often flirts with it. Another shift is how evil is portrayed. The Empire was once terrifying, efficient, cruel, unstoppable. In modern Star Wars, villains are frequently incompetent, mocked, ineffective, played for humor. Evil isn't dangerous, it's embarrassing. But when evil isn't threatening, heroism loses meaning. You can't be brave if nothing is truly at stake. You can't be noble if the enemy is a joke. Classic Star Wars understood this. The stakes were real, loss mattered, victory was earned. This change didn't happen by accident. Modern Hollywood often favors deconstruction over inspiration, subversion over sincerity, ambiguity over clarity. There's a belief that moral certainty is outdated and that stories must reflect a morally confused world. But myths aren't meant to mirror confusion. They're meant to guide people through it. Star Wars wasn't designed to tell us everything is relative. It was designed to tell us your choices define you. When Star Wars abandons moral clarity, it loses its mythic power, its emotional resonance, its generational impact. Kids don't need stories that tell them nothing is right or wrong. They need stories that show them courage matters, sacrifice matters, and goodness is worth fighting for. Star Wars once gave us that. It didn't say being good was easy, it said being good was necessary. Star Wars didn't become iconic because it was clever, it became iconic because it was clear. Clear about hope, evil, redemption, and responsibility. When good and evil blur too much, the story stops being Star Wars and becomes just another cynical sci-fi franchise. The galaxy far, far away doesn't need moral confusion. It needs heroes who believe in something, villains who stand for something dark, and stories that remind us why the fight matters. Because in the end, Star Wars was never about spaceships or lightsabers. It was about choosing the light, even when the dark is easier. May the Force be with you always.